This video was made possible by my patrons, Joshua Bartlett, Scorch88, Drew Cavallo, James Schubach, Douglas Smith, Capitalism is Good, Pipsqueak, Michael, Valerie Culkins, Victor Cage, and Snizzypoo. Thank you so much to all of you. This week's Twitter poll ended in a tie, so I'll be breaking the tie myself. Check my Twitter profile every Sunday to vote for Tuesday's video on My 2 Cents. Hello everyone, this is My 2 Cents, and today we're going to be talking about the Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah. This December, a news story was released reporting that the Obama administration halted an investigation into Hezbollah's drug trading operations because they were afraid that Iran may have backed out of the nuclear deal that his administration was working to secure. The operation, led by the Drug Enforcement Agency and aided by numerous other government agencies, was poised to bring down a $1 billion a year ring that funded the Lebanese terrorist group. Many people were rightly outraged that the Obama administration would do such a thing. However, very few Americans have enough knowledge about Hezbollah itself to understand just how serious this was. I'm thinking that this will be the first in a number of videos that I'll make that will delve into the nature of Iran and its proxies in Syria and Lebanon. Understanding how Iran functions as the national face of the Shi'a sect of Islam is critical in understanding many of the conflicts taking place in the Middle East today, particularly those involving the nation of Israel. For now, let's simply discuss what Hezbollah is. First, I will discuss the history of Hezbollah, followed by a discussion of its religious and political ideology. I will then discuss where Hezbollah operates globally, its leadership, organization, and operational methods, and then finally discuss some of the more notable actions Hezbollah has taken historically, and talk about possibly where it's going in the future. Hezbollah, also known as the Party of God, was founded in June of 1982 in Lebanon after Iran sent military forces to Lebanon to support the country's Shia population. In the country of Lebanon, the Shiite Muslim population has always been the minority compared to groups like the Maronite Christians and the Sunni and Druze Muslims. This rendered them with a low economic and social status compared to other Lebanese. Since 1975, Lebanon had already been torn apart by a civil war that involved various factions in the country, to include the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, a key enemy of the nation of Israel. In 1982, Israel launched an invasion into southern Lebanon in an effort to expel the PLO, who had been operating against Israel from that region. Iran, being a Shiite majority country, that had recently gone through its own revolution, saw this as a perfect opportunity to expand its sphere of influence and further its own anti-Israel agenda. The Shiite Muslims in Lebanon readily embraced the Iranian message of resistance to oppression, which allowed Hezbollah to quickly surpass other existing Shiite militias in Lebanon. As author Asad AbuKahlil stated in 1991, Hezbollah, quote, emerged as a result of the convergence of Lebanese Shiite interests with Iranian foreign policy orientations. Hezbollah adheres to the Shia tradition of Islam. While there are numerous differences between the Sunni majority and the Shia minority, the primary difference is that Shiite Muslims believe that the historic figure Ali ibn Abu Talib, the son of the Prophet Muhammad's uncle, was the true successor to Muhammad. Rejecting the first three historical successors, Shiites hold that Ali established a historical line of imams that are to rule the Muslim world to this day. Another distinct feature of Shia Islam, which is actively practiced by Hezbollah, is that leaders are to serve in both a political and a theological capacity. Individual members of Hezbollah do not have the right to interpret the Quran and must conform their theological beliefs to those of their leaders. Per AbuKahlil, this obedience accounts for the effectiveness of the Party of God and for its organizational discipline. It's ironic, being they are an Islamic terrorist group, but Hezbollah would consider themselves to be true warriors of social justice. Hezbollah's political ideology is in many ways similar to revolutionary Marxism. They present themselves as the party of the oppressed and serve the interests of the entire world of the oppressed in aiming for perpetual revolution towards achieving social, economic, and political justice. While they support an Islamic state run with Sharia law, Hezbollah purports to believe that such a system must be implemented voluntarily by the population. According to Hezbollah's ideology, religious belief cannot be forced, and the population should bear the responsibility of the political system they have chosen. Under Hezbollah's system, Christians and other minorities could be tolerated in accordance with Islamic law. Don't get excited, however. While they profess to believe that their system must be accepted voluntarily, their actions prove otherwise. Particular Lebanese groups, such as Political Marianism and others that openly support Israel and the United States, are targeted for destruction by Hezbollah. Israel in particular is viewed as an illegitimate nation in the region, and Hezbollah aims to destroy it entirely. Seeing the United States as the driving force behind Israel and the West in general, Hezbollah also joins with Iran in referring to the United States as the Great Satan and Israel as the Little Satan. It is important to note, however, that Hezbollah does not merely oppose the existence of the State of Israel, but of Jews, period. In 2002, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah stated, "If they gather in Israel, it will save us the trouble of going after them worldwide." A Lebanese movement, Hezbollah remains headquartered in Lebanon. Key in its founding, the government of Iran remains its strongest supporter and supplier. Hezbollah operatives frequently travel to and are trained by Iranian military and intelligence services. Weapons and other supplies are frequently moved from Iran to Lebanon through Syria. In the past few decades, Hezbollah has grown into a global movement, and it is believed to have cells operating all across the world. In recent years, Hezbollah has actively supported the Assad regime in Syria. Based on comprehensive research, the Counter-Extremism Project believes that Hezbollah is primarily operating in Europe, South America, Mexico, and across the Middle East. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, quote, Hezbollah's top commander, the General Secretary, is chosen by a 7-member Shura Council, which in turn oversees 5 sub-councils: the Political Assembly, Jihad Assembly, Parliamentary Assembly, Executive Assembly, and Judicial Assembly. The current General Secretary remains Hassan Nasrallah, who has served since his predecessor was assassinated by Israel in 1992. Other key members of leadership are Naim Qasim, Nasrallah's Deputy Secretary General, and Hussein al-Khalil, his top political advisor. Hezbollah has a comprehensive organizational structure, serving both political and military agendas. Beneath the Secretary General is the Decision-Making Shura Council. There are 7 members on this council. 5 Lebanese members fill the offices of Executive Council, Judicial Council, Political Advisor, and Military Council. 2 additional Iranian members sit on the council, one from the Iranian Embassy to Lebanon and the other from the Iranian Embassy to Syria. Hezbollah's military arm is broken down into 3 areas: recruitment and training, guerrilla warfare, and security and enforcement. The military ranks of Hezbollah include martyrs, who are trained for suicide operations, standard militia soldiers, elite special operations forces, and everything in between. It is interesting to note that while the U.S. Department of State has designated Hezbollah as a foreign terrorist organization, some countries, such as Australia, only recognize Hezbollah's military element as a terrorist group, while seeing its political elements as a legitimate political entity. Hezbollah uses a wide variety of tactics in its terrorist operations and funds its operations from several key sources. Hezbollah has conducted bombings, kidnappings, attacks on facilities, and assassinations. However, throughout its history, Hezbollah has evolved from using traditional terrorist tactics to more organized guerrilla tactics. To supply its operations, Hezbollah receives substantial amounts of its funding and weapons from the government of Iran. However, in recent years, the amount of funding from Iran has dropped, and Hezbollah has developed a sophisticated network of criminal operations to increase funding. Some of these enterprises include intellectual property crime, drug smuggling, cigarette smuggling, and the exploitation of the African diamond trade. Its worldwide network of cells are responsible for conducting these activities outside of Lebanon. In particular, its drug trading capacity has led some to dub Hezbollah the leading narco-terrorist group in the world. Moving into specific historical attacks, Hezbollah has conducted hundreds of terrorist operations, and prior to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, it had killed more American citizens than any other terrorist group. The attack that put Hezbollah on the map was the 1983 bombing of U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. In this attack, a driver drove a truck filled with explosives directly into the Marine barracks, while another driver simultaneously drove a similar truck into barracks housing French paratroopers. A total of 241 U.S. and 58 French personnel were killed. In 1985, Hezbollah hijacked an airliner, TWA Flight 847, as it was traveling from Athens, Greece to Rome, Italy. For a total of 16 days, the Hezbollah members flew the plane back and forth between Beirut, Lebanon, and Algiers, Algeria, periodically releasing hostages until the final group of 39 American men was released in Beirut. During the time of this attack, nearly 500 news reports were run about the hijacking, and thus Hezbollah was quite successful in projecting itself and its goals to the world. Hezbollah's anti-Israel views were projected internationally in 1992 when a Hezbollah suicide bomber attacked the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, Argentina, killing 29 and injuring 240 others. One of Hezbollah's more famous criminal plots is a cigarette smuggling operation that was run in the United States. In 2000, 18 members of a Hezbollah cell were arrested and charged by federal authorities for smuggling North Carolina cigarettes to Michigan, where taxes on cigarettes were higher. Per the U.S. authorities, the cell had been sending their profits to Hezbollah for the past 4 years. An example of one of Hezbollah's more guerrilla-style attacks happened in 2006 when Hezbollah members crossed the Israeli border, killed 8 Israeli Defense Forces soldiers, and kidnapped 2 others. Israel responded to this attack with a military campaign against Hezbollah. Over the years, Hezbollah has only grown its size, capabilities, and the breadth of its operations. In an interesting turn of events, the past few years have shown that Hezbollah members are increasingly involved in charity and welfare activities for Lebanese citizens. This gives incentive for more Lebanese citizens to support Hezbollah and boosts its image as a legitimate political organization instead of a terrorist group. With Iran always having been the force behind Hezbollah, and Hezbollah's support of the Syrian Assad regime, it is likely that these 3 entities will become increasingly intertwined as they operate in the future, functioning as a de facto Shiite Islamic State. Author Matthew Levitt has stated, quote, "It is high time the international community conducted a thorough and considered discussion of the full range of Hezbollah's resistance activities and what to do about them. To put it simply, the future of Hezbollah will involve them having more political influence in Lebanon, conducting more attacks against Israel and the United States, and Hezbollah will grow increasingly sophisticated in its tactics and sources of revenue. Had the Obama administration not hindered the investigation that was poised to take down Hezbollah's drug ring, Hezbollah could potentially have faced losses significant enough to severely limit its capabilities for carrying out further attacks against Israel, the US, and other Western nations." Coming full circle, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization with both a religious and a political identity. It is based in Lebanon but operates globally. Unlike some terrorist groups, it has a well-defined political and military leadership structure. Finally, it exists to help form a Shiite Islamic State and to destroy Israel and the United States. While Hezbollah may profess to seek to implement its social structure voluntarily, its willingness to use violence against its political enemies proves otherwise. Like all forms of Islamic extremism, Hezbollah's ideology is fundamentally incompatible with Western values and Western culture. Any support or aid to Hezbollah is fundamentally support to helping destroy Western culture as we know it, which unfortunately seems to be exactly what the political left aims to do. Leftists and Islamic extremists end up being strange bedfellows. They are more than willing to align in order to tear down Western culture, but the irony is that if they ever succeed, the Islamists will turn on their leftist allies and seek to subjugate them under their religious political system. Hezbollah is one of many threats to the West today, particularly Israel and the United States. And that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe. You can also hit the bell to ensure you're notified every time I upload a new video. This video was made possible by my patrons. If anyone else would like to donate and help ensure that I have the time and resources to keep putting out content, for just $1 a month on Patreon or Maker Support, you'll receive a shout out at the beginning and end of every video and the link to one of your social media platforms in the description. You can also support the channel by purchasing my 2 cents merchandise on Teespring or from my Amazon affiliate links. To follow me on Twitter, minds.com, BitChute, WordPress, Gab, or iTunes, check out the links in the description. Uploads are every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, so stay tuned for more videos.